We're here with the Viltrox 85mm f1.8 lens, and if you haven't heard of Viltrox, then don't worry because we hadn't either up until we got this lens to test. But Viltrox is a Chinese company and they specialize in making lenses and accessories for cameras.
This is rare, and when it comes to Fujifilm there aren't that many companies which make off-brand lenses, and this could be for two reasons, but the main reason is that Fujifilm already offers you very high quality lenses at a pretty good price. I find their lenses to have the best value, so it's not as needed as some other brands to buy off-brand for cheaper.
Yeah, so this Viltrox lens is actually available for Fuji X-mount cameras, or it's available for Sony E-mount cameras. And for Sony, this lens works with both APS-C and full-frame cameras.
That's right, and if you are familiar with Sony prices, you know a very big problem every Sony user has is that their lenses are very expensive and often pretty bulky, and you really need, there's a gap in the market there for low-cost lenses, and so it makes total sense for Sony. In the case of Fuji, because their lenses are already smaller and have high value, there haven't been that many participants in that market to fill a gap there.
That's right, but this 85mm by Viltrox is only $400, and that's a pretty good price, especially when you consider the other options. If you were to try to find an equivalent lens for Fuji, then you have the option of the 80mm f2.8 lens, which has image stabilization in the lens and also is a macro lens, but that lens is, I think, a little over $1,000. Or you also have the Fuji 90mm f2 lens, and that one is probably the closest competitor to this lens, but it's about almost $800. So this is about half the price of both of those options.
We actually do not own any of those lenses, the 80 or the 90 for Fujifilm itself, which are quite good, and especially the 80 is the go-to macro choice. We can get that if we're into macro. But I do shoot quite a bit with the 35 and the 23mm prime lenses by Fuji, which are both 2.0s, and I love those lenses. They're extremely good, but as you can see, they're really small. So that's one big difference, right? If we compare with this 85mm lens, you see the Fuji prime is much smaller, and the difference in the size does seem to come from the focal length, because Fuji's own 90mm lens is actually about this size as well, maybe a little bit lighter when you do the comparison.
So one of the first things that you're going to notice when you pick up this Viltrox lens is that it's mostly metal on the outside. And the problem with that is that this lens weighs 1.4 pounds, so it's pretty heavy. And that 90mm I think is like just over a pound, like 1.1 pounds. So again, you can probably say that they're pretty close in terms of size and weight, but this Viltrox is a lot heavier. Another thing with the physical features of this lens is that it looks a lot like the Fuji lenses. Obviously it's not a direct match because they have to do like their own branding and everything, but again, mostly metal, and there's like this barrel here that you move around, and yeah, I mean, besides their own branding, which they stuck on the lens, you could possibly think that this was a Fuji lens if you looked at it from afar.
I do agree, they feel similar. They're metal, and the metal feels the same, and the shapes on the lens are the same. So, you know, you're saving half the money pretty much and getting something comparable.
Yeah, but then one of the downsides that this lens has is that there's really no buttons or dials on it, and that can be good or bad because sometimes you don't like to fiddle with little things on the lens, but that also means that you're missing your aperture ring. So you can say more about how that affects the experience.
Yeah, so the case for the lens is really that you can get something comparable for half the price, and that is good if you really want to save the money. However, here's what you sacrifice, and yes, you do sacrifice the usability by not having the aperture ring, which causes problems because then there are times when your display is not going to tell you your aperture in every mode, and you lose that ability to control it as finely as you would in an actual Fuji lens, which is fully integrated. And this is normally my big complaint when it comes to off-brand lens. You always lose something. It's always the case that something quite doesn't work as well as the branded lenses. And in this case, yeah, there's no aperture ring. There's also the fact that when you look at it, there's no stability either. There's no OIS, which is optical image stabilization, which means you're relying on the camera's IBIS. However, you're using a lens which is not truly recognized by the Fujifilm camera itself. And if you are familiar with IBIS as a technology, it's two-pronged. There's the solution that is mechanical, which makes your sensor floating and all that, but the camera also does a whole lot of processing with an algorithm, and that algorithm really needs to recognize the lens so it can correct the footage well. So it remains to be seen whether you get the optimal performance when it comes to stability with this lens, and that matters a lot for video.
I can say, so we've tested this lens out with the Fujifilm X-H1, which does have IBIS, and we also use it on my X-T3, which we are currently using to film this video. But when I was doing my testing, I noticed that this lens, you cannot film any video if you don't have IBIS. Like, you just don't want to bother, because this focal length is, 85 millimeters, but on a crop sensor, it's about 127.5 millimeters. So it really zooms in, and it's really noticeable if you don't have IBIS or image stabilization in your lens. Like, all the footage I tried to get with the X-T3 was completely shaky. I'd say unusable, in fact.
Yeah, so when it comes to stability, Fuji lenses tend to be extremely well stabilized optically. So you see a world of a difference on lenses that do have the OIS and ones that do not. Their prime lenses tend to not have it. Some of them do, but they're rare. And so that is comparable. However, again, the camera recognizes them now, and they have the profiles built out, and they can correct them better, and so that's a downfall.
I would say another downfall is, so, I was kind of late to the Fuji game, but one of the things I love about Fuji is the fact that you have all of these dials and controls, and the way that you control a Fujifilm camera is completely different than how you would do it with a DSLR or a Sony camera. And it's going back to just missing that aperture ring, where not only is it kind of weird to shoot with it, but it interrupts the whole experience of shooting with Fuji. And so when I'm out there trying to get my still shots and switch to video, I still can't get over that. Like, where's my aperture ring? It's just so hard to retrain your brain to doing that, and only with this one lens. Like, you don't do that with any other Fuji lenses.
The other reason that I don't own a single off-brand lens is it comes down to trust. And lenses in particular need a lot of trust involved, because lenses last a very long time. They can last you decades. And the ones that are well built, you can trust over decades. And the build quality inside, there's fine optics and glass and things like that. You don't want them to start becoming loose. You don't want them to start becoming soft and so on. When I buy Fuji, I know that for the next 10 to 20 years, this lens is going to perform. With this brand I never heard of before, I have no way of knowing that. And that to me is big.
What? You've never heard of Viltrox? No, but even though I do quite a few lens review videos on this channel talking about third-party lenses, I actually tend to agree. And I don't, even though I review them, I don't own very many third-party lenses for either Sony or Fujifilm or Canon. And it does come back to trust. And also, if this lens were to break, what do you do with it? Do you send it back to Viltrox? They might have some kind of warranty, but it's not like Fujifilm, where you know that you can go to Fujifilm and probably get that lens repaired, or just like your nearby dealers, are they going to know how to repair this lens if it happens to break or needs servicing? So that goes along with the trust factors that a lot of those established brands, especially for professionals, they have like Canon Professional Services, Nikon Professional Services, and we sign up for that because they guarantee like 2-day turnaround on repairs. And so that's something that you're not getting with this Viltrox brand, although other brands such as Tamron and Sigma are starting to catch up in that regard.
I was going to make the same point. It looks like from the third-party lens makers, Tamron and Sigma are doing quite well.
Yeah.
And what I'm seeing from your Sonys, because they don't really make Fuji lenses, I actually like those lenses.
Yeah, I would say, if you had talked to me or any of the photographers even 5 years ago, there was still a lot of skepticism with both Sigma and Tamron, but they've really stepped up their game along with Sony in terms of their third-party lens quality and also their support for those lenses. So if you are going to buy third-party, I don't have a problem recommending anything from Sigma or Tamron, but it's these other brands like Viltrox. I mean, this feels like a great lens, but again, we don't know like long-term how it's going to hold up. And so, big question mark over some of these other brands.
Yeah, so it's just unpredictable. I have seen many people post really great shots with some of these newer lenses like 7 Artisans or something like that. And so people use them, people are pretty happy with them. It's just that they don't have the long-time established brand and so on. And with that goes loyalty and trust.
Yes.
After we reviewed the footage, we were actually pretty impressed.
I think that when you look at both photos and videos, you wouldn't even know that this was shot with a third-party lens.
Yeah, that is true. Some of these shots, if I had an A and B to try to see which one is a Fuji lens and which one is not, I would totally agree. However, that's not the entire story. When you're shooting with it, you have to pay the cost that the focus is not performing as well as normal Fuji lenses.
Part of the challenge here is also that the minimum focusing distance of this lens is actually pretty far back. So it really takes some getting used to, especially if you haven't shot with an 85 or in this case 127 millimeters, how far back you need to be to photograph or film your subject. And so that got really challenging, and in a lot of cases I actually wish that I had the Fujifilm macro lens, not only because it would give me image stabilization in the lens, but I'd be able to get a lot closer to my subject and shoot it. And this takes a lot of being here and then having to step back and keep going back and back and back until you can finally get your shot in focus.
Yeah, and the other thing is the focus is slow and it rattles and it hunts a bit, and Fuji lenses are very smooth in this. So that part they haven't quite gotten down, but the glass itself, the image quality the optics produce is quite good.
It looks fantastic. I think it has pretty great bokeh actually at 1.8, and the sharpness is there, the colors are there. Everything you love about Fuji is going to be in your image quality when you look at it, as long as you're able to shoot the way that you want to.
Yeah, and when shooting video, you pretty much have to stand still and have IBIS on and not move to pan, but when you do that, it's stable and it's sharp and it looks good. If you try to move the camera, it will be almost unusable.
So in conclusion, is it worth buying this $400 off-brand lens for Fujifilm? What do you think?
I think if you're on a budget, if you want to save the money, but you still are not sacrificing much image quality, yes, go for it and buy it. However, if you have the money to buy the Fuji macro 80mm lens, it costs around 3 times more, but you get a lot more out of it. You get a macro distance and you also get image stabilization and you get the trust and the quality and the support of the Fujifilm brand.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with all those points. I think it really comes down to budget, and if for some reason you can't buy the higher quality and the more expensive lenses, then that's totally fine. This is actually a really great $400 option, but it also comes down to what's your shooting style like and what kinds of things are you shooting. If you're going to be shooting, in a really fast-paced environment where you need your autofocus to be super responsive and super reliable, and you can't afford to have your lens possibly trip you up as you're shooting, then this is probably not the lens for you. But if you're going to be using it casually and you just want a really great 85mm lens and you want it to be on the cheaper side, then this is probably your best option. And along those lines, the 85mm lens, at least on a full frame, again, this because it crops is actually slightly tighter, but a lot of people use this lens for portraits. So portrait photography is one of the most classic case uses for a lens like this. And also, it's kind of like a mini telephoto lens too, so you can get subjects from farther away.
This was another review by Gemini Connect. Please subscribe, comment, and like.
And tell us if you would buy this lens.